वेलकम टू एवरीथिंग इज एवरीथिंग। सब कुछ में आपका स्वागत है। मैं अमित हूँ और ये मेरे मित्र अजय है। एंड टुडे वी गॉट अ लिटिल गेम फॉर यू एज वी स्टार्ट। दिस इज अ ग्रेट एपिसोड। इट्स अ टू पार्टर। पार्ट वन of how to start a business. We are going to randomly talk nonsense about that. But first, we are randomly going to talk nonsense, not about that. And here I am going to test your knowledge of two things you should know. One is Bruce Springsteen, one of our favorite artists. We've both done a Bruce Springsteen, in the sense we've done we haven't both done a Bruce Springsteen episode. We have done a Bruce Springsteen episode together, which is the least watched episode of this show. So please watch it. What are you doing? It's a labor of love. And what I'm going to do for you, and I want to see if you're ready for this, is I am going to translate some of Bruce Springsteen's lyrics into Hindi and you have to identify the song. So this is also about your knowledge of your beloved country. Are we clear? Are you ready?
Let's roll.
All right, here we go. This is kind of creepy actually when you think about these lyrics. It could get you cancelled, but here you go. ए छोटी लड़की, क्या तुम्हारे पिताजी घर पे है या वो चले गए तुम्हें अकेला छोड़ के? मुझ में एक बुरी चाहत है, ओहो हो आग लगी है मुझ में.
I'm on fire.
Brilliant. So, well done. Let's go on to the next one. Here's the next one. मैं शाम को उठता हूँ और मेरे पास कहने के लिए कुछ नहीं है. मैं सुबह घर लौटता हूँ, मैं बिस्तर की ओर जाता हूँ उसी हालत में. मैं बस थका हुआ हूँ. आदमी, मैं थका हुआ हूँ, ऊब चुका हूँ. ए छोटी लड़की. ए छोटी लड़की, मैं मदद. ए छोटी लड़की, मैं कुछ मदद का इस्तेमाल कर सकता हूँ. तुम आग नहीं लगा सकती, तुम आग नहीं लगा सकती चिंगारी के बिना. मेरी पिस्तौल मैं तुम्हें पैसे के लिए दे दूंगा. अगर हम अंधेरे में नाच रहे हैं तब भी.
Dancing in the dark.
I'm so proud of you. Here we go to the next one. Are you ready for the next one? Yeah. मैं तुम्हें अपने बाहों में पकड़ता हूँ जैसे ऑर्केस्ट्रा बजाती है. ये कौन से शब्द तुमने फुसफुसाए छोटी लड़की? जैसे जैसे तुम मुर गई. मैंने कल रात तुमको देखा था शहर के किनारे. मैं तुम्हारे मन में झांक के जानना तो चाहता हूँ कि ये जो नई चीज़ मुझे मिली है ये क्या है. तो बता मुझे, मैं क्या देखता हूँ जब मैं तुम्हारी आंखों में देखता हूँ? क्या ये तुम हो छोटी लड़की, या एक बेहतरीन मुखौटा?
Brilliant disguise.
सो प्राउड ऑफ यू. मैं रास्ते पे चलता गया तब तक जब तक मेरे पैर पत्थर की तरह लगने लगे. मैंने उन दोस्तों की आवाज़ सुनी जो गायब हुए, जो गुजर गए. रात को मैंने मेरी खून की आवाज़ सुनी हर नस नस में. वैसे ही काले और फुसफुसाते हुए जैसे कि बारिश घाटकोपर के रास्तों पे.
Streets of Philadelphia. It's gorgeous in Hindi.
Is credit to some translator and all that. Yeah, you got to. I mean, if if Bruce Springsteen is watching this, I'm the Hindi man for you. Okay, one more. You should get this one immediately, right? It's too easy. कमीज अलमारा में है, जूते बैठक कक्ष में. मम्मी किचन में है, छोटी लड़की और सबके साथ. सब कुछ है, सब कुछ है, बस तुम ही नहीं हो बहन जो.
You're missing.
Yes, and of course a famous song from which we got the title of this show, Everything is Everything. That's right, is Springsteen inspired.
सब कुछ है.
सब कुछ.
I think that's a line of t-shirts.
Let's go on to the next song. Ready? सभी को आराम करने की जगह चाहिए, सभी को घर चाहिए. कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ता कि कौन क्या कहता है. कोई नहीं है जिसे अकेले होने की चाहत है. सबके पास भूखा दिल है, सबके पास भूखा दिल है. पैसा रखो, किरदार निभाओ, सभी के पास भू का दिल है.
How hungry hat.
Well done. And which album?
Forgotten.
This is from The River, if I remember. Great
Yeah,
double
sounds
album.
right, yeah.
Ready for the next one? Iconic song. I think I've given it away, but iconic song. कभी ना कभी लड़की, मुझे पता नहीं कब, हम वहां पहुंचेंगे जहां हम जाना चाहते हैं और हम सूरज में चलेंगे. लेकिन तब तक हम जैसे लफंगे छोटी लड़की, हम भागने के लिए पैदा हुए.
Born to run.
Well done. Here's another one, slightly more obscure. It's a song I love, but it's not one of his iconic songs. So let's see if you get it. This is a big challenge for you. तुमने कहा था कि हम साथ चलेंगे छोटी लड़की, कुछ भी हो जाए. लेकिन जब दिन ढलेगा, अगर हम रस्सा खो बैठे, अगर तुम्हारा हाथ छूट गया, तो मैं तुम्हारा इंतज़ार करूँगा. और अगर मैं छूट गया, तो तुम मेरा इंतजार करना.
If I should fall behind.
Brilliant. I'm so happy. So now I'm going to give you a little bit of a googly. Not a Springsteen song, but a song by another artist who might or might not have inspired him, who did definitely inspire him, a great artist. And you have to identify the songs and the song and the artist. लेट जाओ औरत लेट जाओ मेरे पीतल के बिस्तरे पे, लेट जाओ औरत लेट जाओ मेरे पीतल के बिस्तरे में, जो भी रंग है तुम्हारे मन में मैं तुम्हें दिखा दूंगा वो झिलमिलाएंगे, लेट जाओ औरत लेट जाओ मेरे पीतल के बिस्तरे पे.
Lay Lady Lay by Bob Dylan.
Well done. I'm so proud of you. Do you have any special request, something you'd like me to translate?
Thunder Road.
Okay, let's do Thunder Road. तुम वापस अंदर मत भागो महबूबा, तुम्हें पता है मैं यहाँ किस लिए आया हूँ. तुम्हें डर लग रहा है, तुम सोच रही हो कि शायद हम उतने जवान नहीं रहे. विश्वास रखो रात में जादू है. तुम ज्यादा खूबसूरत नहीं हो, लेकिन ठीक है चलेगा, मेरे लिए चलेगा. Excellent. So now we are done with the tough part of the show, and we are going to move on to our next chapter. Thank you for watching this far. So, gentle readers, this episode is really, and the next episode is about how to start a business. This is a great idea Ajay came up with when we were hanging out at the outdoor location where we go. We didn't shoot it there then, but we brainstormed about it. And the interesting part of it was we both had slightly different approaches to the subject of how we should approach a business. But there are some things that we agree on, and one of the things we agree on is that everyone should think seriously in terms of starting something of their own. I'll let Ajay elaborate with his reasons, and then I'll come up with mine, and then we'll take it from there. Ajay, go for it.
So I want to thank Arjun Rajgopal. This idea for the EIE episode originally came from him. The idea runs like this, that everybody should take a crack at building one or more businesses. Before I go there, I do want to qualify, what do you mean by a business? There is an entire spectrum of possibilities. You could be doing a small side gig on Urban Company, or you could be building a VC funded company aiming to go IPO. There is a whole spectrum where it is little more like a personal project. It is you're doing gigs, all the way to formalizing as a firm, building complexity, adding people and capital, building processes, trying to explore new products versus doing stable things. So there's many shades of gray. But for right now, Arjun's idea, and you and I are both fully on board on that, is that everybody needs to think more about the possibility of starting a business. And we want to say this to you in particular, gentle reader. If you think your life is all tidy and defined, you think that you are a corporate slave, you think you're a university professor, you think your life is defined to the end of your life. Particularly in that case, we think it's interesting and good and important to take the effort of starting one or more businesses. And always, all of you would know us, we embrace failure as a philosophy, that you'll try some things, they'll fail, and that's okay, that's part of life. But the journey of doing is precious, and hey, some of these might work. Okay, why is that? What is to be gained for each of us personally by putting ourselves out there and starting something? I want to offer 3 reasons. Reason 1 is a very simple kind of competence. You work at a different level when you work for yourself. So the quality, the clarity, the precision, the deadlines, the competence, we harness ourselves better when we work for ourselves. I remember in Seeing Like a State by James C. Scott, he has a line where he says, the most powerful fertilizer is the tender gaze of an owner. Okay, so owning your operation and then harnessing yourself to fight for it is something cool, is something different from running to somebody else's definition of a KRA, given all the stupidity of all organizations. Here it's you, you're in charge, you got to get it right. So reason 1 is it will harness you and it will bring forth a level of energy and competence and effort that you may have never thought about yourself. Reason two is it's your path to becoming a better employee. You may have persuaded yourself that for the rest of my life, I'm going to be an employee. But actually, when you build a business, when you run a business, you see the world differently. You develop empathy for what it is like to be the boss, what it is like to be the owner. And it reshapes all of us to think about being an employee in a more thoughtful and empathetic way. It makes us a little less entitled in our ways, and we become better employees because we've seen the world from the other side of the fence. So that's reason two, that the journey to building a business makes you a better employee. So you may well be thinking, look, primarily my life is I'm going to be an employee, but you'll become a better employee by doing one or more business projects of your own. Build them, fight them. You will see it will change you. Reason three, it's a path to learn about the world. Okay, every business is a set of hypothesis testing. You have certain beliefs of the world that if I buy this atta and I buy these Italian tomato cans, I'll be able to make pizza and turn a profit selling it. Okay, that's your view of the world. Very well, try it. Okay, figure it out. Does it work? Does it not work? And you will discover a series of impediments. Many things will go wrong. So you will do 25 things that are wrong, but out of all of that, you will learn. So business is a process of hypothesis testing, and it challenges the mind that you have some theories about the world. Great. Let's see whether they are right or they're wrong. And the process of doing all that hypothesis testing will force you into feedback loops. And that's the best deal in the world. That out of your work in building a business, you will learn the world better. You will improve your knowledge. So this is the way that Arjun and I were thinking that we should build an entire episode around this. Just showing people more about the steps of how it's to be done and emphasizing the shades of gray, that you don't have to go all in. You can do it at various levels of connection and commitment and involvement. But you, gentle reader, need to pick yourself up and try these kinds of things. They're good for you.
I agree with most of what you said, though I think that some of the reasons that you outlined for me are not reasons per se, but byproducts. Like, for example, yes, you could be a better employee, or yes, you could understand the world better if you start a business, but you shouldn't start a business just because of that. Because for me, the one area where Ajay and I sort of disagree is, and we'll elaborate in the second chapter, is Ajay's approach is that you can be a little what was the word you used? Detachment. That Ajay's approach is that you can be a little detached about running a business and be dispassionate about it. And I think that that's a part of failure. You absolutely can't do that. Maybe when you start, you're doing it on the side with something else. But if you're going to be serious, you really have to get committed. We'll come back to that point of disagreement in the next chapter. That's our only point of disagreement. I also want to give a little context that Ajay and I, after we started Everything is Everything, were approached by a business channel and they said, will you do a show on business for us? And something not many people know about me is that I actually, one of the rabbit holes that I follow pretty deeply is the startup ecosystem and the world of business as such. And I have tons of links and accumulated sort of knowledge on it over a period of time. I'm not an active businessman per se, though you could say for the last 15 years I've been the entrepreneur of my own brand without trying to scale or without trying all of those things. So I've had a ton of material over time accumulated on this. So I'm just going to keep looking at my notes a lot because I have a lot of notes on the subject. But I want to sort of talk about the two key reasons why I feel everyone should think about starting a business. And one of them is you should think about doing it because that is a way to stop yourself from getting into a groove. Like typically what happens is that the way our lives are mapped out is we'll do an education and we finish our plus two and graduation and MBA and whatever. Then we join a career, we stay in that career track for 30, 40 years, we become vice president, we become CEO, hopefully, and then we retire, and then we get dementia, and then we die. Now, on the one hand, as you've pointed out, longevity advances mean that if you're going to have health span up to 100, or even beyond, then we can think of life as a series of different journeys we take either sequentially or together. But the other learning here is that we should not think of life as doing just one thing, especially being a company man. You know, there's this famous quote by Bob Dylan that I keep repeating so much is practically a cliche. Even Dylan must be fed up. Every time I think, he'll be, what is that? He'll hiccup when I say this quote again. He not busy being born is busy dying.
हिंदी में करो.
जो पैदा नहीं हो रहा है वो मर गया पैंचो. But I have some other great quotes on this, because I said, hey, I can't just keep going for Dylan, so I'm going to look down into my iPad unabashedly. Benjamin Franklin said, when you're finished changing, you're finished. Neil Donald Walsh said, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And John A. Shedd, with a double D, said, a ship in harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are for. I think I've heard this from you as well. So a fan of ships, not so much a fan of harbors and safety. Isn't that right, Ajay Shah? So that's my first big reason, that you will ossify and you will, settle into doing one thing. And then when the world changes, that is the only thing you will be able to do, and it won't be enough because nobody will want that anymore. And that thought of the world changing brings me to my second reason. My second reason has to do with the changing world. And what I'm also going to do during this episode is that wherever I have a source for whatever I'm talking about, I'll link to it. A lot of my gyan is from this awesome Instagram site called Startup Archive. I think they're also on Twitter. So we'll put all of those links and you'll see it on the screen as well. And this is from a clip where Mark Zuckerberg was asked about the best advice he ever got. And the best advice he ever got, he said, was from Peter Thiel. And Peter Thiel told him that in a world that is changing rapidly, the biggest risk you can take is not changing. And I feel that this is a key reason why you have to change, especially today. We live in the times of AI and automation and massive changes. And if you just do one thing, that thing could get taken over and you could be obsolete. It is instead important to just learn all the time, keep learning new things, keep changing. Jack Welch once said, change before you have to. Be ahead of that particular curve. And therefore, it's totally important that you keep thinking of ways to reinvent yourself. And one of those could actually involve starting a business. There's another great quote by Naval Ravikant where he says that in the future, 10 years into the future, most companies will be small startup companies. There'll be firms of 4 people, 10 people, which will scale up to $1 billion and beyond. And when I think about the firm, like we have a great episode on 4 papers that changed the world. One of them was Ronald Coase's paper on the firm and how, transaction costs made firms inevitable. And even in that episode, you and I discussed about how that logic is changing. And Coase himself would perhaps have been the first to recognize that logic is changing. And the logic of the firm itself, has been upended. And therefore, in future, whether it's a gig economy, whether it's small startups, whether it's webs of small startups working together, we don't know what the future will look like. But you are much more likely to thrive in that future if you are nimble, if you are entrepreneurial, if you think in terms of doing things yourself and not necessarily being a company man. So for me, these are the 2 key reasons why you should think of a startup. Another great quote I love is from Paul Graham, where he says that think of a startup as a way to compress your whole life into a few working years. Like the trading voyages of the Middle Ages, where some entrepreneur would bet everything on one big trading voyage. And we've spoken about this in our episode on the beauty of finance, episode 21. And Graham's idea is, instead of working at low intensity for 40 years, work at high intensity for 4 years. Give it everything. And, then the rest could just be taken care of. So whenever I look at a successful business, and I'm not just talking about an on-scale business like an Nvidia or an Amazon or whatever, even a small business, I just feel that it requires intensity, it requires passion, it requires focus. But what I would urge all of you is think hard about going on your own. As Welch said, change before you have to. And just, I want to plant that thought in your minds, that start thinking about it. So Ajay, before we go on to the rest of the episode, which is all the accumulated gyan I have gathered, what is your advice to people who want to start a business, and what philosophical approach should they take?
I'm primarily about people who are comfortable and they think they have a main life. Okay, so I'm thinking you should do a side gig. It's good and healthy for people to have a side gig. And in this, I already said that there's this whole shades of gray. You could be doing it just as an individual, or it could become a small firm with 3 employees, could become 30 employees, or shades of gray in terms of where you go. And in this, I would always encourage a relaxed approach to risk and failure and the level of engagement. That the essence of a side gig is it's not your main gig, that you have a main life, and on the side, you nurture some of these little bubbling fires and you explore them, you experiment with them, and you try to make them work. There is a healthy value in being detached in this way. Being detached as in, this is not my all consuming passion. Detached as in, you're comfortable with failure. In fact, you might be trying multiple things. Some will work, some will not work. You'll start a new one. So, entrepreneurship and building business as a way of life, rather than that all or nothing where you're devoting yourself fully into it. I feel that that creates a better environment where people will think in a more cool way, where the stakes are low. So because it's not your main gig, it's your side gig, and when the stakes are low, it oppresses you less, and then we are able to more dispassionately try things out. So I feel that there is a lot of value in that kind of detached approach. There is a whisper of that in the world of finance, that the traders who love money the most tend to do relatively less good, because actually their hunger and their need for the money is distorting their clear thinking. Whereas if you're a little detached, you're playing chess, you're playing a game, then actually you are able to think in a more dispassionate and equanimous way. And so we will do better by being a little more detached.
I'm completely on with detachment as a personal philosophy, but even the traders who are detached actually arrive at that detachment because they know trading so well, and they know trading so well because they plunged into it with full passion once upon a time, and they were not detached when they were learning. When they were learning trading, they, just like when you learn anything, they kind of went into it with 100% intensity. But otherwise, I completely agree with you that as a life philosophy, one should sort of be detached and have a Buddhist sort of outlook and not get emotionally carried away. And equally, one should be accepting a failure. But at the same time, my sense is that you can't be too detached when you're starting a business, simply because it is almost, I would say that it is almost offensive to people who are starting a business and throwing themselves into it, because you are saying that a detached me who is giving 30% of my time in X business will do better or will survive compared to you who are giving 100% of your time to X business. It simply isn't like that. I think whenever people start something, they try their absolute hardest. So in a competitive marketplace, if you have the arrogance to think that before plunging into it and giving it everything, I'm still going to succeed because, hey, I'm so cool and 30% of me is enough. I just feel that's a wrong way of thinking. However, at the same time, you can have a side gig which you are good at, which only you do, where, you can have a detached outcome, but it's not your main business. It's not the main thing you do.
I guess I'm assuming that you've reached that level of knowledge where your 30% actually is full mastery of something. And then, it can bubble along on the side.
But despite that, frankly, somebody else will have that full mastery as much as I do, but they'll give 100% of themselves. So I can't think of any examples from all the people I know who can actually build a successful business while being detached about it. I know many side gigs. I mean, I've had side gigs myself and so on, but even the side gigs that I've had actually, have, like, podcasting became my main gig once it got to a certain stage, because you can't simply, be casual about it, as it were.
Okay, Amit, get us going. How should we get going on building a business?
So the first thing I would say is that when people think of starting a business, it's dangerous to sometimes think immediately about scale and just think about how do I get it to as many people as possible and so on and so forth, right? And one of the big lessons of my life, which I learned and which was later put into words by Paul Graham in the context of startups, is this: that it's better to be loved by a few than liked by many. And Paul Graham has this great quote about how it's better to have 100 people who love your product than 1 million people who like your product. And I realized this with the seen and the unseen back in the day. Like at one point, I used to say that I'd rather have 100,000 people download an episode than 10 million people watch a show of mine on YouTube. At that time, I didn't have a YouTube show, of course. And the reason for that is that the 10 million people watching something on YouTube might have an average view time of 15 seconds, 20 seconds, as so many channels do. So it's very shallow engagement. They're not really going deep into the content. Whereas at one point in time when I passed the stats, my average session time for the seen and the unseen was 40 minutes, right? Average session time, and people listened across multiple sessions. That is so off the charts that if you told me this 15 years ago when I was an internet professional, I would just have assumed you're lying, and perhaps the most immersive video game in the world can get those kind of stats. But today, I think it's not like a humble brag. I think the long form podcasts can get that. The idea being that there are a few people, but their engagement is far deeper. They really care about you. They will, in fact, really pay a premium for you, for your wisdom, like for the courses that we do, whether it's the art of clear writing back in the day or life lessons now, which we charge a premium for and indeed get that premium. So I realized that that's an important lesson, that you don't have to look at absolute numbers that are 1 million people downloading an episode, but you look at what is the engagement of the people who do download it, and then in different ways can you monetize that if you're thinking along those terms, which for the longest time I didn't, because it was all a labor of love for me. And Graham's famous quote, and Graham, of course, started Y Combinator. So it's something that's spread through that ecosystem. Like Brian Chesky of Airbnb talks about how he took these words to heart. So initially, when he had just a few customers in the early days of Airbnb, he would actually go to them to see, oh, okay, what is your place like and what are you advertising about it and so on. And at one point, there's a famous story about how he asked, one of the house owners that, do you think it would help if you could post photographs on it? And he realized these people, if they take a photograph themselves, it's not too great, it's just looking bad. So he said, do you think it would help if there was a button on the site and you could click that button? And if you hit that button, then we send a photographer over who photographs your place. And the guy said, yeah. So then he calls the guy a little while later after leaving and he says, hey, we've put a button. So the guy clicks a button and the next day the doorbell rings, the guy opens it, is Brian Chesky. And he's like, oh my God, you must be a really small company. Don't you have anything better to do? And then Chesky's himself landed up with a camera to take the cool photographs, right? And the idea being that it doesn't matter how many customers you have at the start. If each of them freaking loves you, talk to each of them individually. Say, how can I make something better? How can I improve this? Oh, that feature, you want it like that. I didn't realize that. We'll do it just for you. And then you do it. Once that 100 people loves you, your product itself will become so awesome that it will begin to spread. And then scaling isn't difficult because you have got an incredible product. Jan Koum once spoke about, I think this was in an interview with Sam Altman, and he once spoke about how in the early days of WhatsApp, they were charging $1. And he said we were charging $1 for WhatsApp because we didn't want it to grow too fast. Right? We wanted to control the user base because we wanted to make sure that we could handle and please the users we already had. How can we make our servers less slow? How can we make our customer service more responsive? Get all of that things, get all those things right for the customers you already have, and then you expand and go to the next stage. And I find that really inspiring. So I would say that if anybody is starting, start off with thinking about who's going to love this and work for that love. Speak to your customers directly. Too often we just take a step back and reach a level of abstraction where we're just looking at numbers and markets and all of that. No, just get concrete, speak to your customers, think about what specific things they want in the product that will make it better, and just work on that love. And once you get that right, the rest falls into place.
Okay, Amit, what else should we be thinking before we take the leap?
Before we take the leap is actually a pretty good phrase, because many people never end up taking the leap, and they don't end up taking the leap because they listen to all the skeptical voices. So my second bit of advice would be, don't listen to naysayers, right? And of course you share your idea and you take in all the good feedback about it, the good criticism. But too often what happens is, whenever we hear something new, our instinct is to say no but. right? And I actually fight this in myself. Whenever someone comes to me with a new idea, I know my first instinct is because it doesn't fit into my model of the world, I'll start saying no, but. So I consciously stop myself from saying that and think about it, and, before I respond. And too many people react in that manner. Like there's a beautiful clip we'll link to here, which is about Jerry Seinfeld talking about a pilot that was done for Seinfeld in 1989. And the pilot was shown to a customer focus group, right? These are things to beware of: consumer focus, customer focus groups, where they'll do a market survey of a product to find if it works or not, which is the worst way to do something. And they showed the pilot of Seinfeld to this test audience. And then the test audience said things like one piece of feedback I remember was, no segment of the audience wants to see the show again. There was another piece of feedback which said that we didn't like Jerry's backup ensemble. This is a Seinfeld ensemble, the greatest. Have you watched Seinfeld, Ajay? I don't even know what to say. But between us, I want to assure you, we have watched Seinfeld an average number of times, because I've probably watched it twice as much as the normal person. So anyway, so just a remarkable show with a remarkable ensembles. But this is the feedback they got. And had the marketing guys, won that argument, the show would never have happened. But luckily, someone took that leap. The show happened. There's a great video by Mark Anderson where he talks about a lot of the great innovations which we take for granted were once thought about as, curiosities and not something that would ever be mainstream. For example, telephones. The whole idea of the telephone was that telegraph operators would talk to each other through a telephone. It wasn't conceived as something that would, be in common usage. Similarly, in the internet, if you remember what the media would say in the 1990s, the mid 1990s, even the Silicon Valley media, there was so much skepticism. There's a famous video of Bill Gates and David Letterman, where Letterman is just so incredibly skeptical about whether the internet is something. It's like a curiosity. And the best example that I really love is about cars. Today, you would think that the first car appears and everybody says, wow, the future of humanity has changed. But actually, no, it was looked upon as a toy for rich people, especially because early iterations of the car had a peculiar problem. Number one, they would stop after a couple of minutes, 3 minutes, whatever. So every car would have to have someone called a stoker. And the stoker would have to start the engine, as it were. Even the terminology is like referring to older technology, right? But so you'd have a stoker who would have to start the car. And it was seen as a toy for rich people. So they would also hire a driver to drive for them. And at one time, Britain came up with the red flag law. Are you aware of the red flag law?
No, I don't.
Okay, so the red flag law is this, that Britain came up with a law that every car has to have 3 employees, right? 3 employees for every car. One is the stoker who's got to start the engine when it stops, not if. The second is the driver. And the third is a guy who will walk 60 meters ahead of the car with a red flag, waving the red flag to warn people that a car is coming, so that, horses and carriages don't get into trouble on the road. So this is how outlandish the idea of driving seemed. And if at that time, Henry Ford had carried out a customer survey to find out what do people want, he would probably have found that everybody who is in transportation says we need better bred horses, faster horses, and not that we need a car. It would have seemed ridiculous. So you got to sort of think about naysayers with that view. Especially the better your idea, the more likely it is that there will be many people telling you that it cannot be done. Here's a great video by Steve Jobs where he talks about how you have to ignore the experts, especially consultants. Jobs had utter contempt for them. He was like, hire good people, and more on this later, hire the best people, and then ignore the freaking consultants because they don't have skin in the game. Vinod Khosla, the great venture capitalist, who was an entrepreneur himself, founder of Sun Microsystems, later a VC at Kleiner Perkins, and his own firm now, once said that 70% of VCs add negative value to a company. They make things worse. Because what will typically happen is you'll have somebody doing a fancy MBA from an Ivy League university, joining a VC firm, and then giving gyan from all the textbook wisdom they have learned. But the truth of the matter is, unless you have actually been an entrepreneur yourself and been through the daily challenges, experience failure and crisis on a daily basis, you simply don't know. And therefore, if you don't have skin in the game, you should really watch out. So if you're an entrepreneur with an idea, you've been living with that idea, it's kept you awake at night, you've got to take yourself and your passion much, much more seriously than advice coming from outside.
Okay, Amit, what area should one operate in? What kind of thing should a person start?
I think what I'd advise everyone to do, and I'll elaborate on this particular sentence over many different contexts in this episode and the next, is whatever you do should come from inside, not from outside. Right? Too many people make the mistake when they want to start something or they're thinking, ki, I want to start a business. What is there a market for? Or often people who would do my podcasting course would ask me that where is a niche in the market that I would fill, and I think that's a wrong way of thinking about it. If you just try to find holes in the market, what will typically happen is that you will go in the same direction everyone is rushing towards because everyone thinks like that, and then that is a pure part to mediocrity. Like Peter Thiel, for example, has a great video on how trends are overrated. He says anything that is trendy is generally full of shit. And he says that one of the things that raises a red flag for him when someone comes to him for investment is how many buzzwords are there. So if you have big buzzwords like big data or cloud computing or in our time blockchain or AI, machine learning, whatever, chances are is full of shit. If you just peep a little further, if you have a genuinely new idea, you don't need a buzzword, number one, and number two, it's quite possible that no buzzword quite fits it. So the important thing to note is that don't begin with what you think the world wants. Begin with what you have yourself experienced about the world and what you have been passionate about. Like a great piece of advice that Paul Graham gives to people who want to do a startup is just learn. You begin by learning, gain that domain expertise, right? And as you gain that domain expertise, projects will emerge. And a lot of these great companies, in fact, I think all of the major great companies started off as projects, almost as hobbies at first. Like Yahoo started off as a web directory for Stanford. When Page and Brin started Google, it didn't start out as a search engine. It started out as PageRank. There was an intellectual challenge that how can we do search better? They tried to sell it to other search engines like Excite, right? They weren't thinking of a business at the time. They were thinking of a pain point. Let me solve this pain point. Apple began with Jobs and Wozniak coming together, making computers as a hobby and not thinking about a business at the start. Similar with Bill Gates, similar with a lot of the people who start early, similar with Facebook, which started in a dorm room. So the thing is, you don't have to have a big vision for a grand company right at the start. You are much more likely to get there to a business that changes the world if you first begin with a project that excites you. What are you passionate about? Look into that. That'll lead you towards a project. That project may be something that would therefore help others also. And then as you extrapolate from there, you begin to come to some idea of what could make for a business. But you begin from inside, you begin with love, you begin with interest, you begin with curiosity. Just learn, as Graham puts it. Another quote I love is from Peter Thiel, where he uses Elon Musk and SpaceX as an example. And he says that work on something that wouldn't happen without you. I'll interpret that in two ways. One is that work on something only you can do, but there's a bit of hubris in that. There are, whatever you can do, somebody else can also do, but work on something. The second way of interpreting it is that if you didn't do it, nobody else would. SpaceX would not happen without Musk, the example that he gave. But this doesn't have to apply to grand projects like going to Mars. It can apply to everything at an individual level. Like, for example, the seen and the unseen is something with the long form 8-hour, 10-hour, 12-hour conversations, which would not exist without me. And I'm not saying no one else can do long form podcasts, but that show would not exist if I didn't do it and take my particular intellectual curiosities in those directions with those people. Everything and everything is everything would not exist without you and me getting together and saying, okay, let's have these kind of conversations in this kind of way. So I was chatting with a very good friend of mine I won't name him because he's a huge celebrity and much more famous than me and a very big person in the creator economy. But we were sitting and chatting about this the other day, and I broke down everything he does. Like, he's incredibly sort of prolific, but I was like, look, A, B, C is stuff anybody can do. I don't understand why you're doing it. D, E, F. These are the things that really only you can do. He's written a film which is a love story set out of Lucknow with that kind of feeling to it, and it is so much him. And I was like, only you could have written this, only you can make this, right? So I get it, it's a great project, but there's something else that you might be doing which is, anybody could do it. You do it well, but anybody could do it. And because we have limited time, it is therefore useful for us to think about how we handle that particular scarcity. There is a scarcity of time. We are all growing older. Longevity is great, but it's not immortality. And therefore, what do we do with our time? And I would like to do things which are unique to me. Like, in a sense, I'm really glad that, that project of doing that show for that business channel didn't really work out, because it wouldn't have been something only you or I could do. Right. So, then we would have done it really well, but then why do it? Though if somebody comes with a shit ton of money, we are still open to it, but a shit ton of money only. So that's sort of my thinking about it. And I wonder what's your opinion on this, Ajay, that, do something that wouldn't happen without you. How does this fit in with your life and the things you do?
It's hard to think about this too carefully. So I always pose this as the question that if Einstein had not existed, how many more years would have gone by before you got to relativity? Okay, and the answer is yeah, bit by bit, people would have found it. So, in that sense, I think everything happens in time because finally the human journey of knowledge is one. But there is a point, there is a time, there is a place where there is a creative fire and there is one person or a small group of people who are possessed with something cool and unique. And it's a great triaging rule for ourselves that do the stuff that we can do that essentially others are not able to do, are not ready to do. So in time, ideas will happen. But at that moment, if there is a bunch of people, if there is a community, if there is a person charged with something unique, then that's a great reason to do it.
No, I'm thinking about the stuff that you do, and it strikes me that you more or less hew to this in the sense that all of the stuff you do is authentic to yourself. It's coming from deep inside. It's not something that there's a market demand for this and I have the skills. It's never that. It's stuff that you love doing, that you want to do. You're driven by that purpose. So whether it's XKDR forum or the papers you write, and I think this show itself, it's stuff that is a genuine thing. It's not people saying कि इसके लिए market है. No. You do it because you want to do it. Is that correct?
So I fight hard on the triaging problem. Uh, Triaging is a buzzword. If a bomb has gone off at a coffee shop, the first responders come and classify the people screaming and moaning on the ground into green, red, and black. The green are basically going to survive on their own, the black are going to die. And the red is where you put the peak effort because your impact will be the highest, your marginal contribution will be the highest. So I feel blessed that I have a very high rate of inventing things. I come up with many ideas. My laptop is filled with half a page of scribble lines in innumerable areas. And then I try to do that triaging of choosing what is the battle worth doing. And so then, yeah, like doing something unique, doing something high impact, do a few big important things. I think that's what keeps one energized and going. Otherwise, it's also boring, right? Doing dull things, it's just hard to stay hungry and stay driven.
This brings me to my next point, which is about focus. And there's a great quote by Sam Altman I'll read out where he says, "Focus is a force multiplier on work. Almost everyone I've ever met would be well served by spending more time thinking about what to focus on. It is much more important to work on the right thing than it is to work many hours. Most people waste most of their time on stuff that doesn't matter. Once you have figured out what to do, be unstoppable about getting your small handful of priorities accomplished quickly. I have yet to meet a slow-moving person who is very successful." Stop quote. And you find this coming up time and time again, when it comes to startup founders who are talking about the things that work for them. Like there's an interview where Bill Gates and Warren Buffett were sitting together and they were asked about what is their most important quality. And both of them said focus. Focus is the key thing. In fact, Gates said that one of the things that he learned from Buffett was how to say no. He said that once I asked him to set up some event they were doing together, and Buffett opened his calendar and he looked at the calendar and it was blank. There was hardly anything there. And he said, "How do you do this?" And he said, "I've learned to say no. You should also learn to say no." And the lesson here is not just learn to say no to things that you don't want to do anyway. Right? That is easy. We manage that even if we are people pleasers. But learn to say no to things that you love. Like There's this again a famous interview of Jonathan Ive, the great Apple designer, who talks about how Steve Jobs, when he rejoined Apple in the late 1990s, had a chat with Ive, and he said that, listen boss, here's the thing, that you have to learn to say no to things you love. There are many things you love, but even if something keeps you up at night, you go to bed thinking about it, you wake up in the morning and you're thinking about it, even then that might be something that you need to say no to, because you've already decided on a priority, and you kind of you want to focus on that. There's another great interview of Drew Houston, the founder of Dropbox, where he says about how his company had reached a particular inflection point. They were doing video sharing software, file sharing software, etc. It was kind of all over the place. He couldn't handle everything, even though they were, building great products for both. When he read Andy Grove's book, Only the Paranoid Survive, Andy Grove of Intel, of course, and in that book, Grove talks about how in an early phase of Intel, they were basically doing memory chips, right? And then they got a chance to also do microprocessors. And in memory chips, because it was a saturated market relatively, they weren't doing so well. And Grove talks about how one day he reached the similar inflection point to what Houston was going through. And he realized that, hey, I need to focus. I need to go all in. I need to put all my chips in one basket. So they had actually acquired a couple of companies for their video sharing, if I remember correctly. But they decided, no, we will drop that entire thing, because what is important is just having our focus on doing one thing and getting that right. So that's another key sign of focus. And again, everything that you said, that there might be many, many shiny objects that attract us and we could build great businesses off, or many products our business could make. But I am much more in favor of just figure one thing out and get that right, and then you're sorted.
Yeah. And see the connections with what you said a moment ago, that we should be focused and absorbed in what we do, and we should be uniquely good at those things that we do. Okay, if we are doing things that just needed to be done and many others could do it, you're probably not delegating enough. So our zone of concentration, our zone of focus should be on some things where we add value, where there's literally nobody else who can quite play at the level that I can play. That should be my test to myself about the things that I do with my own hands. Okay, Amit, go forward. What should we do next?
So we will end this episode at the beginning, in the sense that we will end this episode with beginning your business, and then in the next episode we'll go forward into a bunch of different nuances of what to do after you actually start. And my advice there is just start. Right? Have a bias for action. As you know, I keep talking about the bias for action and how important it is to just jump in and do stuff. Like, I think about all of life, everything we do, being a trade-off between getting it done and getting it right. And, too often we want to get it right so badly that we keep planning, and we never even start. Abraham Lincoln once said, give me 6 hours to chop a tree and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. Too many of us spend the first 4,000 hours sharpening the axe, and sometimes we just have to plunge into it and get the job done. And that's how we actually find out what will work, not by thinking about it before even doing it. There's this great phrase I love from Brian Armstrong of Coinbase, where he says, action produces information. Right? Every time you do something, you learn a little bit. And therefore, do this, do that, do A, B, C. Just keep doing different things. And with each thing, you get some piece of information and you make your offering better, or you pivot just a little bit and you learn something about the world. But if you don't do that stuff, you don't learn. Like, there's an interview with Kevin Systrom of Instagram, where he says that my biggest regret is that we were in a private beta for a while. I think for 6 months or something, it was just private beta. And he's like, don't do private betas. Just put your product out there. And again, to cycle back to what we said earlier about find 100 customers who love you. Put your product out there. Your first customers may think your product sucks. Fine tune it till it's awesome. Fine tune it till 100 people love you, and then you go forward. But if you don't even start, if you don't even begin, that simply ain't gonna happen. Right? I think it was Paul Graham who said something to the effect of, the key quality of a shark, or what is important for a shark, is that it keeps swimming. If it just stops, it's just going to sink. It ain't gonna work. And Armstrong of Coinbase had this great metaphor where he said, imagine you're standing at the bottom of a foggy mountain and there's fog. If you're going to stand and wait for the fog to clear, you'll be at the bottom of the mountain forever. Instead, you got to take us one step at a time, and you just got to go ahead, and eventually, you know, you'll go higher up the mountain. This reminds me of something Milan Kundera wrote in his book Testaments Betrayed, where he says, imagine a man in a fog, right? And I wonder if Armstrong actually came up with his metaphor from this, but here's what Kundera said, and I love it. He said, imagine a man in a fog, and he doesn't know where to go and he can't say anything. But he keeps taking one step after another, and with each step that he takes, he makes his road. And then eventually he gets to wherever he is going. And then, if you turn around at that point and you look at the man in the distance, you will see the man and you will see the road, but you will not see the fog. And the point is that fog is ubiquitous for all journeys that we all take. So if you are standing at a point in time and the future looks madly confusing and the past seems clear and you think, oh, all these people who made all these trips must have seen the road ahead of them, that's a hindsight bias at work. You know, certainty is something you can only have when you look back on the past. And even then, most of the time, please don't have certainty. But when you're looking ahead, we are all in fog. And the only way to navigate that fog is to move forward. So, dear listener, you know, have a bias for action, start your business. You can even start it between now and the next episode, though the next episode undoubtedly will also help. But if you start it between now and then, I will be so happy. Please do that. And yeah, so that's all I have for this week. Ajay, what about you?
Let's do it.